Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. We are exploring the mystical side of life once again this week. If you enjoy our conversations, make sure you subscribe, share it with a friend. Today, we have Dr. Mark Halpern, who is a chiropractor in Toronto and also a big proponent of the HeartMath work. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
So for any of the listeners who have not heard of the HeartMath Institute, can you give us just a little brief snippet about the kind of work that they do there?
They've done some really interesting work. When they first started back in, late 80s, early 90s, they had none of the research. They just knew that when you started to breathe in a specific way and you got your heart, into what they would call a coherent rhythm, you would start to affect the brain and how you make decisions and how you self-regulate. And to their delight, after years of getting research and doing the research, it really proved what they were talking about. And so HeartMath has taken this concept of heart rate variability, where you start to increase your heart's resilience and adaptability by changing the way you breathe and becoming a stomach breather and using nice deep breaths and doing it in a specific way, so that you start to use visualization, breath work, and emotion so that you can start to entrain the higher centers of the brain. And what they found out was that the heart's electrical power is about 40 times stronger than the brain's electrical power. And so in the body, the strongest wave wins out. It's called entrainment. You see it in nature all the time. In the ocean, the bigger wave will take over the smaller wave. And we see, even if you go into a clock store, the largest clock, the one with the biggest strength, usually all the other clocks tick at the same frequency as that clock. So that concept of entrainment happens in the body. And so if the heart gets into a nice coherent rhythm, which means it's in flow, it's in balance, you can start to do that to the brain. And as the brain starts to entrain to the heart, you start to be able to make better decisions. It affects your immune system. It affects your ability to deal with pain, your emotional state, stress, sleep, all of these really important things to allow your body to heal. And so what HeartMath did is they created this technology and also these techniques. So you don't need the technology to do the techniques. However, their biofeedback technology helps to train you if you enjoy using them. So they've written books and they have biofeedback technology, and all of it is to help you get into what I would call a physiological coherent state, where you are able to choose the emotions that you want to feel and change up the depleting emotions that you may be feeling, which are, bringing you down and stress, into more uplifting emotions, which are renewing you and making you feel more resilient and able to adapt to life. And so it's really amazing because HeartMath really works on 3 levels. You can change your own physiological state in the moment, but as you learn to create more coherence in your own body and your own life, you can then share that with people around you. In other words, your energy affects those around you. And the research has clearly shown that your heart's strength, the electromagnetic field of your body, will start to affect those around you, and you can start to help their ability to get coherent. And as the community gets more coherent, what their research is showing is you can start to have an effect on the entire planet. And so they actually did some research back around the September 11th, 2001, when the planes hit the building. There was actually a blip in the Earth's electromagnetic field that was measured at these different poles around the Earth that was at the frequency of the human heart. And what the theory was is that there was enough people feeling this emotion of grief that it actually changed the electromagnetic field of the planet for a brief second. And so their theory has been, if we can all hold this feeling of love, gratitude, and inspiration, could we change the planet for the better? And so really HeartMath works on 3 levels: for yourself, for your community, and for the planet. And I just love that as you're working on yourself and your own coherence, you're also helping those around you and potentially the entire planet.
This particular time in history is a time when we definitely could use a little bit more coherence, a little bit more peace and compassion and togetherness, absolutely, as a species and community. So as a chiropractor, why did you start looking outside of your box for solution?
There's really two sort of answers to that. One is when I first got into chiropractic, I was more of thinking mechanically, back pain, neck pain, athletes, that kind of thing. I didn't know a lot about chiropractic. I was only 19, 20 when I really applied and got in. But very quickly, as I got into chiropractic, I realized chiropractic is really about how the brain and nervous system function and how you heal from the inside out and above down, inside out. So your brain is affecting the entire body. And there's a whole philosophy that came with chiropractic I didn't know about your innate ability, the innate intelligence of the body to heal and function. And so as a chiropractor, it became very, very normal or very common for me to want to expand out into more of a philosophical, spiritual side. But the great news is that so much research is being done on meditation, on HeartMath, on these type of techniques that now the spiritual is meeting science. Really, I came up with a background of feeling a lot of anxiety. Starting in puberty, I just started to feel, I guess, the insecurities that many teenagers feel. And I started developing these really bad, what I would call neurological patterns, just habits of thinking. And as you produce these thoughts, you produce stress chemicals. And as you produce stress chemicals, you produce anxiety. And then the anxiety produced more thoughts. And it's just this cycle that kept going. And this really was my teens and my 20s and even my 30s of just so much anxiety. And so I really looked outside of my own surroundings and what could I do? And because I was part science and part spiritual, I determined I was going to try every method I could find. I didn't care if it was medication and cognitive behavioral therapy, or if it was seeing someone for past life, regression in, quantum theory of energy or feng shui, or it didn't matter. I tried it all, to some success, to some not so successful. And so over the years, I really had this toolbox of things that some worked and some didn't. And so as a chiropractor, it just felt very, very sort of coherent. It felt right to be searching and finding these answers for myself. But it took a while for me to come up with what I felt was a good solution to my problem, which was really using our own breath, using our own senses to control our emotional state. And once I had that breakthrough in my 40s, everything else sort of started to come together from there. And that's how the Coherence Revolution started, really right back at the beginning of the pandemic.
So please tell us, Mark, what the Coherence Revolution is.
We had just been sent home for the pandemic. They sent us home and they said, you know what, you're going to be shut down for several months. I had no idea when I was going back. And so I thought, this is the time. I didn't want to fall prey like a lot of the people I saw, getting really stressed out, and their lives were turning into a bit of a nightmare. And so I determined this wasn't going to happen to me. And with my background of anxiety, I thought this is not a good situation. So I started to write. This is back in the spring of 2020, just as the pandemic started. And I literally went through everything I'd ever done for anxiety, every book, every therapist, every technique, everything. And I went back to the books that I had, folded a little page over that eventually one day I'd get back to it. And this was the day I was going to get back to it. And so I went through everything, and basically the book just started to take hold. Like the first part of the book is about my story. Then it goes into these concepts that really changed my life. And then I go into how do we use the world around us to start to change our physiological state, because it's all about creating new emotion. And so the Coherence Revolution is about really utilizing what you have around you to change your emotional state. For instance, there's different sounds or music that might change your emotional state up or down. Some might make you relax. Some music might really get you up and ready to dance. Same with visual. There's certain things that you look at that can change your emotional state, whether you're looking at a mountain or you're looking at an electrical field, right? And we can use the same thing with our taste, with our smell, with digestion. These things all have the ability to change our emotional state. And if we understand it, then we can start to consciously make these changes. And so the Coherence Revolution is about going through the process of figuring out how to do all of that.
So, Mark, people react to things differently, right? So what might make someone peaceful and calm might not make the next person.
That's right. So that's why we talk about self-inquiry. In the course that I'm teaching, it's a 6-week course. And each week we learn specific HeartMath techniques. So by the end of the 6 weeks, you'll have practiced and learned at least 5 or 6 different techniques to help with the breath work. But surrounding that, there's a workbook that you would get. And each week we dive into a different sense. And to your point, let's say we're talking about auditory. There are certain sounds that might actually make you more stressed, and certain sounds that will make you feel really relaxed. Some will make you feel grateful and in love, you know. So the idea is we give you a guide to how to do the self-inquiry. And so each week you will dive into a different sense. And actually in one of the weeks, we bring it all together and we do a piece of music, which has 30 different tracks, which is all different forms of sound and music, from drums and classical music to pop, rock, and country, just every form of music while you are finger painting. And the idea is that you want to see how your flow changes with different music, your emotion changes, the colors you use change. And so we bring it all together by bringing all the senses. But the purpose is to go through, to do the self-inquiry. So at the end of the 6 weeks, you have a toolbox that you know exactly how each sense will stimulate you for the negative or for the positive, because knowing both is important. And then I actually have people put together what's called a daily time schedule. And in their daily time schedule, they're going to put down everything they've wanted to do in their life from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, what their week looks like. And then they do one extra step, which is they put what emotions do they want to feel at those times of day. When you wake up, what emotions you want to feel at lunch, at work, when you come home, when you're with your friends. And then the idea is you have such a toolbox, you start to practice those emotions. And because as you start to practice the emotions of your future, and you start to practice the emotions of your dream life, they start becoming more familiar to you. And as they become more familiar and easier to attain, the life you wanted to live becomes more feasible. And you start to feel like, oh, I can attain this life. Because the idea is that we're so stuck in these patterns of thinking and feeling. The only way to get out of it is to start creating new ways of thinking and feeling. And then you start to form new habits. And so that's really what the Coherence Revolution is all about, is creating a process for you to follow on a daily basis, as opposed to having what I call a destination mindset, which is the I'll be happy when thinking, right? I'll be happy when I get my first job, when I get my house, when I'm married, when I'm rich, you know. It's always delayed gratification.
Right, short term.
So I'm talking about creating a process that even if you fall off your process for a week, you have a bad week, you don't have to get anywhere. You just have to go back to your process and start to live it again and start to do the things that work for you and use the tools that you've discovered work for you. So when you go through this 6-week process with the online course, you should have something very practical at the end of it. And you should also be able to have the tools and the confidence that you can start to change your emotional state if you're stuck in some of the more negative, depleting emotional states.
Aside from changing your emotional state, what benefit is it for people to actually come into this coherent heart space?
Well, there's so many benefits, because coherence in and of itself, just the act of increasing your heart rate variability through the act of the breath work. Generally speaking, as you age, your heart rate variability shrinks. And so what they've seen is that if you increase your HRV, your heart rate variability, you actually increase the length of your life. You live longer. And so what we're seeing is as you train yourself for HeartMath and you start to increase your heart rate variability, you will theoretically live a longer life, but it's really about adaptability. How does your body and brain and nervous system adapt to the world around you? So do the same things make you as stressed out? Do they affect you as quickly? Then the answer is no. You become more resilient. You become able to adapt to the situations better. And this is going to affect every relationship. It's going to affect your job. It'll affect the way your body heals. It affects your immune system. It affects the way you sleep. It affects every interaction you have with people on a daily basis, because when you're more adaptable and more resilient, you're able to engage in life in a way that is more inspired, more based on gratitude and love than uncertainty and fear.
And on a spiritual level, would it not connect you with your own innate wisdom, your own core sense of who you are?
Yes, people talk about intuition in all different kinds of ways. I use a term in my book, which is basically fight or flight Zen. And it's because there's this intuitive feeling that I used to get. I still do, but I just don't have the necessity for it anymore. But when I was really in a anxious state, but I was able to use some of the tools to start getting more coherent, that voice inside my head, or I don't even know if it was inside my head, it was inside my body, but I felt it talking to me. And it was that voice that if I was, really anxious and frozen, it would say to me, hey, go get in the shower. You got to go to work in about an hour. You're going to have to eat. I know you're feeling down, but the fact is, this is just a thought. This is just a feeling. It's not you. So why don't you go eat something? You know, that's going to make you feel better. You know, getting in the shower is going to make you feel better. And it's that intuitive sense you start to listen to. And I developed this ability within a very anxious state to listen to that voice, because it was always telling me to do something to put me into a more coherent, more balanced state. So I think that you're absolutely right. When you start to gain control of your emotional state and ability to get into coherence, you have this connection with yourself where you start to listen to that voice more than the one that's just trying to escape, more than the one that's just trying to, avoid things because you're fearful. You start listening to that true intuitive voice that's coming from a genuine place.
Mark, I love also that it impacts our environment and the other people around us. It reminds me of Dr. David Hawkins' work and how, the earth needs either an enlightened master or so many of a higher level consciousness in order to keep the balance. So if we could all just step up a little bit, imagine how much better the world would be for everyone.
Well, especially now, and the way people's behavior has changed. There's a lot of hostility, but it's based upon fear right now. And I think we all should just be a little kinder, even to that person that's pushing your buttons or in the grocery store that is beyond rude. You have to think what's going on in their life that they're responding in this way. What has to be happening in their life and the fear that they're feeling to be able to speak that way to people. And so as opposed to maybe the gut reaction, which is to tell that person off or to tell them why they're wrong, I think the opposite tact is actually necessary right now, which is just to give them a little love, show them a little understanding, even if you know that you don't agree with any of their views. They're obviously suffering in some way. And we're seeing that more and more. People's lives have changed so much in the last 2 years. And even if it's not so bad for them, it's so uncertain. And the uncertainty is hurting people. And so the idea is we just have to have a little bit more understanding of that people are going through it so that we can love each other just a little bit more instead of, getting a little bit more frustrated with each other.
And the breath is such a powerful way to do that, right? If we're feeling anxious or high anxiety time, I've noticed my shoulders will go up, my breathing becomes very shallow in the kind of upper chest breathing. And the second I bring my breath back down, it's like momentarily I'm in a better state. It's that easy.
Yeah, the first thing I teach people generally is to pause and breathe. Forget about all these techniques and things that maybe you can learn and are fabulous. But mostly it's pause and breathe. And if it's up to me, the first thing people would learn is to become stomach breathers rather than chest breathers, because most people are taking these short inhalations through their chest, and that in and of itself can create a stress response. We want to fill our stomachs up like a balloon as we breathe in through our nose and really extend the stomach, and then breathe out through pursed lips, just like that, so that you can extend your out breath. Because when you breathe in, it stimulates what's called the sympathetic system, which is your fight or flight or alert system. But when you breathe out, you're stimulating the parasympathetic, which is the relaxation system. And so just a little bit of a trick for people is to elongate their out breath. So I try to do more of a 4-6 breath just to get a little bit of relaxation. So I might breathe in through the nose and then out. and elongate the out breath so that you're just stimulating the relaxation system a bit, and you do that 4 to 6 times, you will be in a different state. And it can get, once you learn more of the HeartMath techniques and specific ways to use your visualization and emotion, well, then you take it to a whole other level. But you don't have to know techniques just to get benefit out of a few short stomach breaths. That alone can change your state.
Absolutely. And listeners, make sure your shoulders are down, not hunched up. That'll make a huge difference to how you can breathe. The other thing I'd like to say, Dr. Mark, is that I am shamanically trained in the Huna system, and we have something called the Ha breath. It's very much like you said, a very controlled exhale. We do actually a count of 2 to 1. So the exhale is twice as long as the inhale. And boy, oh boy, it just really puts you in a great state.
Well, it's amazing how many different types of breath work there are. I mean, even in the last 2 years, I've done HeartMath for probably close to 15 years, but there's new breath work out. A guy named Wim Hof, who is, he's known as the Iceman, but he does this breath work, which uses hyperventilation and breath holds. And you can get your whole body tingling and you can start to hold your breath for minutes at a time. It's really good for anti-inflammatory product in your blood. There, some of the studies that they've done with it. And then one of his, I think, disciples invented something called Soma. And Soma breath is, again, this rhythmic breath. And so what we're seeing all around is people using the breath in different ways. And there's obviously different yoga breaths and different meditation breaths. And I do some work with Dr. Joe Dispenza on meditation, and he's got a whole other breath system that he uses. But the idea is, the more you see this, the more the concept of how much power we have with our own breath and how we can change our physiological state. You can try whatever you want and see which one works for you. I move around quite a bit, but I always seem to come back to HeartMath as my center, simply because getting into this nice coherent rhythm, it just makes sense to me, and my body seems to go with it very easily.
Absolutely. Dr. Mark, thank you so much for being my guest this week.
You're very welcome.
If people would like to learn more, how can they reach you?
It's www.coherencerevolution.com. And if you go to that website, you can actually download the ebook for free. I want people to have this information. I want people to start learning it and using it. And so if it resonates with you and you really want to make a change in your life, and all the information is there, and people can reach out to me if they have any questions. My email is on the website, and I'm happy to answer any questions and help you along your journey.
Beautiful. Keep doing that good work, Dr. Mark.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to this week's edition of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find all of our conversations on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Come visit me at thoughtchange.com. Pick up your copy of Learning to Listen. It will help you immensely in that coherence. And check out my group, Alchemy from the Inside Out. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.